What happens when a simple $5 tip turns into a life-altering decision? Tasha, a waitress working long hours just to get by, has no idea that this small act of generosity will set off a chain of events that could change her life forever. When a wealthy stranger leaves her an unexpected tip, it's the catalyst for a choice she never saw coming. But little does she know, this decision will lead her down a path she never expected, one where the stakes are higher than she could have ever imagined. Tasha thought she knew who she was, but when an offer from a billionaire knocks on her door, everything she's worked for is about to be tested. Tasha Brooks leaned over the counter, wiping away the streaks of rainwater that had made their way through the windows, adding to the fog on the glass. The diner, a small, family-owned establishment nestled in the heart of a rundown neighborhood in Chicago, had seen better days. The streets outside were soaked, and the sky was a deep gray, as if the heavens themselves were mourning something. Inside, the hum of the neon lights above mingled with the quiet clatter of dishes. But tonight, the usual buzz of activity was missing. Only a handful of customers dotted the rows of booths, and most of them were quiet, lost in their thoughts, waiting for the rain to pass. Tasha's feet ached. Another brutal double shift at the diner, and she could feel every hour wearing her down. Her hair, pulled back into a tight ponytail, was damp from the humidity, and her apron had seen better days, stained with coffee spills and sauce. But she didn't mind. She was used to it. She had always been used to working harder than anyone else. She had to, for her family, for her mom, who was battling cancer, and for her younger brother, trying to make his way through college. Her shift had started just after dawn, and now, in the late evening, she was nearing the end of another exhausting day. The clock above the register ticked slowly, and with every passing minute, Tasha's mind wandered. She thought of her mother back home, struggling with the pain, and her brother's upcoming exams. The weight of her responsibilities had become a constant companion, but she bore it with pride. She had to. It was her role. The only one she had. A sudden bell rang as the door opened, a gust of cold air blowing in with it. A man entered, shaking off the rain with a curt motion, but he was dressed in a well-tailored coat, his collar turned up against the downpour. His shoes were polished to a shine, and his face was shadowed under a dark fedora. The kind of man who always looked like he belonged somewhere better than here. Tasha didn't pay much attention. He was just another customer, probably passing through, escaping the rain. He walked past her, giving her a brief glance, his eyes unreadable, and settled into a booth by the far window. And the sound of his boots on the worn floor was muffled by the diner's hum. But she noted that he was alone. In a place like this, where the rich and poor rarely mingled, it was always curious when someone walked in with no company. But it wasn't her place to wonder. As she moved through the motions of taking orders and refilling coffee mugs, the man barely glanced up. He had a worn look about him, despite his expensive clothes, as if he were tired in a way that didn't belong to his age. Still, and he was just another face, and Tasha was used to them all. There were days when she couldn't even remember who had come in, just that they had come and they had gone. The rain continued to beat against the windows, a steady rhythm that added to the loneliness of the night. Tasha moved back to the counter, organizing the tips jar. Her fingers brushed the edges of the small bills, but nothing in her life had ever felt stable enough to count on any of it. A few dollars here and there, and enough to pay for the bus fare or cover part of the rent. There was never enough for anything more. It was just as she was about to go check on her customers again that the man at the booth got up, signaling for the check. She walked over, her tired legs carrying her slower than usual, and set the bill in front of him. He looked up at her, his eyes sharp and calculating, but there was something else there too, something that made her pause. "Can I get some soup to go?" he asked, and his voice low but firm, with a slight rasp, as though the rain outside had gotten into his lungs. "Sure," she replied, her voice automatic. Anything else? He shook his head, then reached for his wallet. As Tasha turned to walk away, she heard the faint sound of a crumpled bill sliding across the table. A $5 bill. It landed right in front of her, a gesture that made her stop cold in her tracks. Tasha looked down at the $5 bill, feeling a wave of emotion she couldn't quite place. Well, she had seen this before. This was how people like him, people who didn't even look at her twice, paid for kindness. It wasn't the first time she had been given something so small, so dismissive, as if her time was worth less than the price of a coffee. But this felt different. The weight of it was off. There was something about it that felt wrong. She had been given tips before, too many times to count, but this felt like an insult wrapped in currency. She glanced up at him, already pulling his coat on, clearly preparing to leave. No thank you. No acknowledgement of her. He was just another man passing through. The anger hit her like a wave, but instead of letting it fester, she felt something else, a sense of dignity. She had been working hard for hours, sacrificing so much, and yet here she was, receiving something that wasn't even worth the effort. Tasha turned slowly, letting the $5 bill sit there for a moment, before she reached down, picked it up, and walked back to the booth. "Sorry," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I can't take this. In my place, guests don't pay for kindness." The words came out louder than she had intended. A challenge without malice but full of meaning. She wasn't sure why she said it, but it felt like something inside her had cracked open. Something that had been buried under the weight of the years. The man stared at her for a moment, his eyes narrowing. But instead of saying anything, he simply looked down at the bill and then back up at her. A faint glimmer of something in his gaze. Curiosity, maybe, or surprise. She wasn't sure. Tasha felt her heartbeat quicken. What had she just done? The $5 meant nothing to him, but to her it meant everything. This was the currency of her life, and she had refused to accept it. And for the first time in a long while, she felt something more than exhaustion. She felt a quiet sense of pride. No matter who he was or what he had, or it was her dignity he would never take. The man stood up slowly, his hand hovering over the table, his lips parted, as if he was about to say something. But before he could, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. He slid it across the table toward her. "If you ever change your mind," he said, his voice quiet but with a note of sincerity she hadn't expected. "This is my number. I can make sure you don't have to struggle for long." Tasha stared at the card, unsure of what to say. The words were kind, but they felt empty, like something a man like him had said before. She didn't need his help. She needed something far more than money. But as she picked up the card, something inside her told her to hold on to it, to remember it. Not for him, but for herself. The man walked out of the diner, leaving Tasha standing there, the $5 bill still lying on the table. She couldn't take it. Not now, not ever. But she couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, something had just changed. Her fingers brushed over the business card he had left behind, the white paper smooth under her touch. She turned it over, as if expecting some kind of revelation to appear, something that might make sense of what had just happened. But there was only a name and a number. Michael Ashford, she read, followed by a string of digits. Tasha felt a knot in her stomach. She wasn't naive. People like him didn't do things out of kindness. But there was something in the way he looked at her, something in the way he spoke, that made her question everything. Why did he care? Why would he go out of his way to leave her a business card, to make an offer that felt too good to be true? She slipped the card into her apron pocket and took a deep breath. She had to focus. Her shift wasn't over, and there were still plenty of customers to serve. But her mind kept drifting back to that moment. The $5 tip, the strange offer, the way she had felt something shift within her, something both unsettling and hopeful. As the night dragged on, the diner grew emptier, the sound of rain against the windows now more of a background hum than a distraction. The few remaining customers were wrapped up in their own worlds, and Tasha, exhausted from hours on her feet, found herself standing by the window, staring out at the streets below. She thought of her mother, of the cancer diagnosis that had shaken their family to its core, and of the sleepless nights spent trying to keep things together, trying to make ends meet. She thought of her younger brother, who was still trying to figure out his life, still trying to find a way out of the same cycle of struggle that had plagued their family for years. The weight of it all felt suffocating sometimes, but she carried it with quiet determination. That's what you did when you had no choice. You carried the weight. The diner manager, a weary man named Frank, was called out to her from across the room, snapping her out of her thoughts. "Hey, Tasha, we're about to close up. You can finish up and head out whenever you're ready." She nodded, still lost in thought. Closing time. Another shift ended. But for some reason, this night felt different. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken an unexpected turn. It wasn't the $5 tip. It wasn't the business card. It was something deeper, something that had been building inside her for years. Oh, but now, for the first time, it felt like it was bubbling to the surface. As she gathered her things, her mind kept returning to the man's words, to the quiet sincerity in his voice when he spoke about her choices, about her values. He had seen something in her that most people didn't, and for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she was worth more than the small tips she had always received, more than the endless hours of work that had kept her in this rut. She shook her head, was trying to push the thought away. She had no time for fantasies. She had to keep her focus. But as she walked out the door into the night, the rain still falling in soft sheets, she couldn't ignore the spark of possibility that had been lit inside her. Tasha didn't know what would come next. But as she walked down the street toward her small apartment, the card still tucked safely in her pocket, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. Tasha didn't mention the strange encounter to anyone. She didn't even take the time to reflect on it. There were bills to pay, medical appointments to attend, and 1,000 other little things that demanded her attention. But every now and then, when the world seemed quiet enough, her fingers would touch the business card again, and she would wonder if it was all just a mistake. Or worse, if it was all some kind of trap, something designed to take advantage of her. She had seen people like Michael Ashford before, rich, powerful, disconnected from the realities of everyday life. They lived in worlds where money solved everything, where kindness was a transaction, not a choice. She had learned that lesson early in life. Trust no one. Trust your instincts. But there was still that nagging feeling, that strange sense that maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong about everything. It was late one night, when she had just finished putting her daughter to bed and was sitting at the small kitchen table trying to balance her checkbook, that the phone rang. Startled, Tasha picked up the receiver. "Hello? Tasha?" The voice was unfamiliar but calm. "Yes, who is this?" she asked, her heart racing. "This is Michael Ashford. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Tasha froze. It was him, the man from the diner. No, it's fine," she said, her voice shaky. What can I do for you?" "I was hoping we could talk," Michael said, "about the offer I made you the other night." Tasha swallowed. She had no idea what he was about to say. But one thing was clear. Her life was about to change. She wasn't sure how or why, but she could feel it deep in her bones. Sure, she said, her voice steady. What did you have in mind? I'd like to meet with you, in person. Tomorrow, if that works for you, he replied. Tasha hesitated, unsure. Where? I'll send a car for you. We can meet at my office. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew one thing for sure. This was her chance, a chance to change everything. And so, against her better judgment, she agreed. The next day, she found herself standing outside a sleek, high-rise building in downtown Chicago, staring up at the glass and steel structure that loomed before her like something out of a dream. A black car pulled up, and the driver stepped out, holding the door open for her. Tasha hesitated, then climbed in. The ride felt surreal, the city rushing past her as if in fast forward. When they arrived, Michael was already waiting. He greeted her with a firm handshake and a warm smile. "I'm glad you came," he said, his eyes studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She nodded. "I wasn't sure what to expect, but here I am." Michael motioned for her to follow him. "I want to show you something that could change everything for you." As they walked down a long hallway, Tasha couldn't help but feel that she was stepping into a world she had never known. The walls were lined with expensive artwork. The air smelled of leather and polished wood. This was not her world. But it was about to be. She didn't know it yet. But everything was about to change. Tasha followed Michael through the sleek corridors of his office, and each step taking her further away from the world she knew, and closer to something foreign, something that felt almost impossible to touch. Her shoes clicked on the marble floors, a sound that seemed too loud in the otherwise silent hallways. She glanced up at the tall, polished walls and the gleaming glass that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. This place felt like a different world entirely. As they approached a set of large double doors, Michael turned to her, his expression calm, as almost unreadable. "I want to show you something," he said, his voice steady, yet there was an intensity to it that made her stomach flutter. She nodded, trying to steady her breath, even as her heart raced in anticipation. What could this man want from her? She didn't know yet, but she had the uncomfortable feeling that it was more than just business. Michael opened the door, revealing a spacious, modern conference room. A long, polished table gleamed under the soft, ambient light, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city below. Tasha hesitated for just a moment before she entered, feeling small in the grand, sterile space. "Have a seat," Michael gestured, pulling out a chair for her. "We're just going to talk for a bit." Tasha sat down, the cool leather of the chair pressing against the back of her thighs. She folded her hands in her lap, trying to seem composed despite the overwhelming sense that she was being swept into something much bigger than herself. Michael took a seat across from her, leaning back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. He seemed to be studying her, as though trying to decipher her every thought. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, thick with tension. "I've been watching you for a while, Tasha," he said finally, breaking the silence. "Not in the way you're probably thinking. But," he paused, considering his words, "in a way that tells me something different about you." Tasha blinked, not quite sure what he meant. "I'm not sure I understand," she said cautiously, unsure whether to be flattered or suspicious. "You've got a kind of strength," Michael continued, his voice smooth, like he had said this to countless others before. "It's not just the way you handle things, but the way you live your life. You work hard, you sacrifice, and when you still keep going." Tasha shifted in her seat, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. "I do what I have to do," she said quietly, lowering her gaze to the table. Michael's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Exactly. And that's why I'm here." Tasha's breath caught in her throat. Why are you here? I want to give you an opportunity, Tasha. A chance to do something more with your life. That's something that doesn't involve serving tables for tips or worrying about rent every month. She met his gaze now, the words sinking in, but her mind struggled to grasp what he was offering. What are you saying? Michael's smile widened, almost imperceptibly. I'm offering you a position, a partnership, if you will, with me, with my company, with everything I've built. Tasha's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, the world seemed to tilt beneath her. I'm not sure I understand, she repeated, this time her voice tight, a mixture of awe and disbelief. You've already been tested, Tasha, Michael said, leaning forward slightly. Not just in your work ethic, but in your character. I've been watching you, and I can tell you're someone who believes in doing what's right, no matter the cost. Tasha's throat tightened. She knew what he was getting at. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. This was more than just an offer for a job, and it was an offer to change her entire life. But something inside her recoiled. She didn't want to be part of this world, the world he was offering her. A world of power, money, and privilege. She had seen what it did to people. The greed, the manipulation. She wasn't that person. You don't have to decide right now, Michael said, as if reading her thoughts. But just know this. You have an opportunity here to change your life, to do more than just survive. Yet you could be a part of something much bigger than yourself. Tasha took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. What would I have to do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. That's the thing, Michael replied, sitting back in his chair. There's no catch. You'll start small, of course, but with your talent, I have no doubt you'll rise quickly. All I ask is that you consider it. Take some time to think about it. Tasha felt her head spin. Her entire world had just shifted, or the ground beneath her feet no longer solid. The possibility of a different life, a better life, lay in front of her, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that this was all too easy. She stood up, the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. I need to think about it, she said, her voice shaky but firm. Michael gave her a small nod, his eyes still fixed on her. Take all the time you need, Tasha. Well, but just remember, you don't get opportunities like this every day. Tasha walked out of the room, her mind racing with questions, doubts, and possibilities. She couldn't deny that the offer was tempting, that it was everything she had ever dreamed of. But at what cost? As she stepped into the elevator and descended to the lobby, her thoughts were a blur. The elevator doors slid open, and she walked out into the bright, bustling city streets. But even as she looked around, everything felt distant, like she was seeing it through a haze. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her back to reality. She pulled it out and saw a text from her brother. Hey sis, just checking in. How's everything going? She stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keys. How could she explain this? How could she tell him that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet understand? Instead, she typed back, same as always. Oh, just trying to make it work. She hit send and slipped the phone back into her pocket, the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. As she walked down the street, her thoughts kept returning to Michael's words. She had always believed in hard work, in doing things the right way. But now, for the first time, she was faced with a choice. Stay in the world she knew, or step into a life that could be everything she ever wanted. And somehow, it didn't feel as simple as just saying yes or no. The rain had stopped, but the dampness still lingered in the air, wrapping itself around Tasha like a heavy cloak. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders, the familiar hum of the city surrounding her. The sound of car engines, distant voices, the soft clinking of coins in the nearby street vendor's booth. All of it felt like a background noise to the storm that was brewing inside her. She couldn't stop thinking about Michael. but she had known people like him in passing, men and women who wore success like an invisible cloak, who seemed untouchable in their wealth and power. But there was something different about him, something that made her question what she thought she knew about people in his position. She found herself stopping in front of a small park, her feet instinctively bringing her to the bench that had become a familiar resting place during her brief breaks. The park was nearly empty, save for a few straggling joggers, but the solitude felt comforting. Tasha sat down, her elbows on her knees, her fingers weaving together as she stared out at the city. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe, to feel the weight of the decision that was hanging over her. She thought of her mother's struggle, the hospital bills that were piling up, the looming uncertainty of what the future held. She thought of her brother, barely making it through school, and of herself, constantly scrambling to stay afloat, never fully feeling secure. This wasn't just about money. It was about survival, about the kind of life she wanted to offer her family. The offer Michael had made was tempting, more than tempting. It was a lifeline thrown at her from a place she never imagined reaching. But there was something else, something gnawing at the back of her mind, something she couldn't quite shake. The question of why. Why had Michael Ashford, a man who could have any opportunity in the world, singled her out? What did he see in her that made her worthy of his attention? He had to be testing her, she realized. Testing her in the same way a rich man might test a charity volunteer, trying to see if she would accept the handout without questioning it. Tasha wasn't naive. She had learned early on in life that nothing was ever free. The world wasn't built on kindness, it was built on power, money, and manipulation. Every day she saw it, but in the eyes of the people who came into the diner, who judged her without a second thought, who tossed a tip on the table like they were doing her a favor. It was a world of transactions, not of generosity. And yet, she had turned away that tip, that $5 bill so small, so insignificant to someone like Michael, but so important to her. She had chosen dignity over what was offered to her, and for once it felt like the right thing to do. But was it enough? Was she enough? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her thoughts. She pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Her brother. She tapped the message open. Sis, I know things have been tough lately, but I believe in you. Keep pushing. We're almost there. A small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. Her brother, always optimistic, always hopeful. His faith in her felt like a weight she didn't deserve but was grateful for nonetheless. She tapped out a quick reply. Thanks, I'm doing my best. Won't love you. She stared at the screen for a moment longer, a flicker of doubt creeping into her chest. Michael's offer was still fresh in her mind, but she knew her brother was right. She had always pushed through. She had always found a way to make it work, even when the odds were against her. The sound of footsteps broke her reverie. A man in a business suit walked by, his phone pressed to his ear, his eyes glued to the sidewalk in front of him. He didn't look at her. He didn't even glance in her direction. He was just another passerby, lost in his own world. And yet, for some reason, Tasha felt like he represented everything she had always fought against. The coldness of the world, the distance between people who were trying to survive and those who were trying to thrive. She took a deep breath and stood up, shaking off the tension in her shoulders. It wasn't time to dwell on what could be. She had to focus on what was in front of her family, her work, on her life. She couldn't lose herself in the fantasy of what might be. But as she walked back down the street, her phone buzzing again, this time with an unknown number, a strange sense of dread settled over her. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew it had something to do with the path she was about to walk. She answered the phone, her voice steady, but with a hint of hesitation. Hello? Is this Tasha Brooks? A deep voice on the other end of the line asked. Yes. Oh, this is Tasha. This is Daniel from Ashford Enterprises. Mr. Michael Ashford would like to meet with you tomorrow at his office. He's scheduled a time for you at 3 p.m. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. The offer had become real. There was no turning back now. I'll be there, she said, her voice tighter than she intended. She could already feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Excellent. We look forward to seeing you. The line went dead, and Tasha stood there for a moment, whilst the phone still pressed to her ear. She could feel the weight of her decision, heavy in her chest. She had just taken a step into something bigger than she had ever imagined. Tomorrow. She would meet Michael Ashford tomorrow, and her life would never be the same. The day was slow to unfold, the sun barely peeking through the haze of early morning clouds. Tasha woke to the sound of her daughter, Maya, stirring in her bed across the room. But the warmth of the early light filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows on the walls of their small apartment. The place was cozy but cramped, with the hum of the city outside reminding her that she was just one of many trying to get by. Maya, still half asleep, mumbled something about breakfast, and Tasha's heart tightened with the weight of the promise she had to keep. But there was always something in her heart that pushed her to make sure her daughter never felt the burden of their circumstances. Maya didn't need to know about the nights when money was tight, or the days when her mother worked double shifts just to put food on the table. She deserved better than that. She deserved to feel safe, loved, and like nothing was impossible. But today, that promise felt like it was on the edge of shattering. As she moved about the apartment, was making breakfast for her daughter, her mind kept drifting back to Michael Ashford, to the offer he'd made. His words echoed in her mind, like a constant whisper, "Oh, you could be a part of something bigger than yourself." Her fingers lingered over the edges of the plate she was setting down in front of Maya. She had always worked hard, prided herself on doing the right thing, but Michael's offer made her question everything. Could she step into his world, this world of power and privilege, and keep who she was intact? Could she trade the simple, meaningful life she had worked for something more? Tasha tried to focus on Maya, smiling as her daughter picked up her fork. Maya's innocent chatter about school, about her friends, about the adventures she'd had on the playground that day filled the silence between them, and for a brief moment, Tasha forgot about everything else. It was easy to lose herself in Maya's world, and easy to remember that the love she had for her daughter was the only thing that mattered. But today, that would change. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, and Tasha felt the pressure build in her chest. 3 p.m. was fast approaching, the hour she'd be meeting Michael Ashford, and the hour when everything could change. She didn't know what to expect, didn't know how this would all play out, but something in her gut told her that whatever happened, it wouldn't be easy. The morning wore on, and soon Tasha found herself on the bus, Maya tucked safely at school, and the day ahead feeling uncertain. She clutched her bag tightly in her hands as the bus rattled down the rain-slick streets, passing by familiar places. Yet everything felt unfamiliar. The buildings she passed seemed distant now, as if she was looking at these through a different lens. Michael's office was on the 35th floor of a building that looked like it belonged in a different world, and the thought of stepping into it made her feel small. She had seen buildings like this before, high-rise towers with shiny glass facades, places where people with power made decisions that affected millions, yet she had never been a part of it. When the bus finally reached the stop near his office, Tasha took a deep breath, the cool air biting at her skin as she stepped off the sidewalk. The building loomed before her, its sleek glass reflecting the gray sky, and for a moment, she froze. Yeah, this wasn't just about a job or an opportunity. This was about crossing into a world that was completely alien to her. A world of wealth, influence, and expectations. Could she navigate it without losing herself? Would she still be Tasha? Would she still be the woman who made sure every customer in the diner felt seen, even when no one else did? With each step forward, her heart beat a little faster. She was about to walk into a room where her worth wouldn't be measured by the work of her hands, but by something else entirely. The doors slid open automatically, and she stepped into the lobby. A sleek, modern space with polished floors and cold marble walls. The receptionist behind the desk barely looked up as she announced her name, and a moment later, a man in a sharp suit appeared to escort her up to Michael's office. The elevator ride was silent, but Tasha's mind was racing. The doors opened with a soft chime, and the man led her down a hallway lined with black and white art, stopping at a door at the end. He knocked softly, then entered without waiting for a response. "Mr. Ashford will see you now," he said, holding the door open. Tasha stepped into the room, the heavy door closing behind her with a quiet thud. Michael was sitting behind a large desk, papers spread out in front of him. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp. "Oh, Ms. Brooks," he said, standing to shake her hand. "I'm glad you could make it." His handshake was firm, businesslike, and for a moment, Tasha felt herself shrinking under his gaze. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, especially not from someone like him. But she took a deep breath, steeling herself. This wasn't just about him or his money. This was about her and the future she was trying to build. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, and her voice steady despite the nerves tightening in her stomach. Michael smiled, gesturing for her to sit across from him. "I've been thinking about our conversation," he said. "I think you'll find what I have to offer more than just a job. It's a chance to change everything." Tasha sat down, her palms suddenly sweating as she braced herself for whatever he was about to say. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to turn around and walk out that door. But something inside her, something she couldn't explain, made her stay. "Michael, I'm not sure what this is all about," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I know you said I could be a part of something big, but what do you really want from me?" He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest, studying her. "I want to see if you're willing to bet on yourself," he said. "I want to know if you're ready to take control of your future." Tasha felt her pulse quicken. But this wasn't just about a job. He wasn't asking for a simple yes. He was asking her to make a choice that could change everything. "I'm listening," she said softly, her voice thick with the weight of the decision she knew she was about to face. Michael leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that felt almost too much to bear. "Then let me show you what's possible," he said, his voice low and persuasive. "Let me show you a world where you don't have to worry about rent, about bills, about the next paycheck. A world where you're not just surviving, you're thriving." For the first time, Tasha didn't know what to say. She had always dreamed of a life where she didn't have to scrape by. But this was a step into the unknown. This was everything she had ever wanted, and yet, something inside her resisted. "What do you want from me?" she asked again, her voice trembling now, unsure of what the answer would be. "I want you to trust me," Michael said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "And I want you to take that first step into the life you've always deserved." Tasha's heart raced, and for a moment, she didn't know if she could take that step. But one thing was clear. Whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. She sat there, motionless, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Michael's words hung in the air between them like an invisible thread, pulling at her. Every part of her screamed to walk away, to step out that door and back into the life she knew, the life that felt safe, even though it was hard. But something else, something deeper, something she hadn't let herself feel in years, whispered that this was her chance, her moment to do something different. "I've worked hard all my life," she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "I've done everything I could to make sure my daughter had what she needs. But I don't know if this life you're talking about is for me." Michael smiled, that same calm smile, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just a smile of business. It was one of understanding, as if he truly saw her, as if he knew what it was like to fight for something every single day. "Of course, you've worked hard," he said, leaning forward, his tone almost gentle now. "I know you have. I've seen it. But what I'm offering you isn't just more work. It's a way out of all the endless struggling. But you deserve more than to be stuck, Tasha." Tasha shook her head slightly, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "I'm not stuck," she replied, her voice firm now, as though convincing herself. "I'm doing what I have to for my daughter, and I don't need anything more than that." "You think you don't need more," Michael said, his gaze unwavering. "But we both know you do. You just haven't let yourself want it. You've been living your whole life for others, for your family, for your daughter. But what about you? What do you want, Tasha?" Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't asked herself that question in a long time. She'd been too busy surviving. "I want to make sure my daughter's okay," she said, her voice thick. "I want to give her a better life than I had." Michael nodded slowly, as if he understood. "And that's exactly what you'll be able to do if you take this step. Think about it. No more worrying about bills, no more juggling 3 jobs. You'll be able to do whatever you want, not just for your daughter, but for yourself." Tasha looked down at her hands, her heart racing as she tried to push aside the rising tide of hope and fear. She couldn't lie to herself anymore. The idea of a life without constant worry, a life where she didn't have to fight every second of every day, felt too good to be true. But the doubts lingered. The world Michael was offering her felt like a world she didn't belong to. The people she knew, and the life she led, none of it fit with the life he was promising. And yet here she was, sitting in front of him, a man who had everything she had ever dreamed of and more. "I don't know if I can trust this," Tasha said quietly, her voice cracking slightly. "It feels like everything's too much. Like there's too much to lose." Michael stood up and walked over to the window, his hands tucked into his pockets as he looked out over the city. For a moment, Tasha thought he might be ignoring her, but then he spoke, his voice low, almost contemplative. "You're right. There is a lot to lose," he said. "But think about what you've already lost. Think about the years you've spent struggling, thinking you had to do it all on your own. What if you didn't have to? What if you could stop carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders?" She couldn't answer him. The truth was too complicated. She had always believed that strength came from doing it alone, while that relying on others, especially someone like Michael, was dangerous. People used kindness as a tool. People betrayed. But then she remembered the way he had looked at her when he offered her the business card that night. He had seen her, truly seen her, and somehow she had to believe that wasn't just a game. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Scared of what I'll lose if I say yes. Scared of what you'll ask of me." Michael turned back to face her. His expression softened now, almost reassuring. "I'm not asking you to give up anything that matters. I'm asking you to take a chance on yourself. You've worked hard, Tasha. You've proven that. Now let me help you prove what you're truly capable of." For a long moment, there was silence between them. Tasha's heart thundered in her chest, her mind spinning with the weight of her decision. She thought about Maya, about her mom, about everything she had fought for. She thought about the woman she could be, the woman Michael was offering her a chance to become. But then there was a sharp, bitter sting at the back of her mind. The life she had known, her family, her friends, wouldn't understand. They'd see her as someone who had sold out. The thought made her stomach turn. "I need to think about it," she said, her voice steady but strained. Michael smiled, but it wasn't the confident, calculating smile from before. This time, it was warmer, and almost like he had expected her answer. "Take all the time you need. But just know this, Tasha. You've already made the hardest decision. The rest will fall into place." She nodded slowly, standing up and walking toward the door. As she reached for the handle, Michael's voice stopped her. "One last thing," he said, his tone shifting slightly, as though he was about to say something important. Tasha turned back. "Yeah? You'll be tested, Tasha," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "Mom, this world is different. But if you truly want to change your life, you have to be willing to let go of the fear. You can't live in both worlds." With that, Tasha stepped out of the room, her thoughts racing faster than she could process. As the elevator doors closed behind her, she let out a shaky breath. Tomorrow was the day she would make the choice that would decide everything. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she had the power to shape her own future. But the night before the meeting, Tasha couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind was flooded with thoughts of Michael Ashford, his offer, his words, his intense gaze. She tossed and turned in bed, the sound of the city outside muffled by the thin walls of her apartment, the soft hum of passing cars, the distant chatter of people walking by, the occasional honk of a horn. It was all so familiar. Yet tonight, it felt alien. Maya was asleep in her room, and her steady breathing, a quiet reminder of why Tasha had fought so hard all her life. The love she had for her daughter was the only constant in her world, the only thing that mattered more than anything. Tasha had always put her family first, but now, for the first time, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about the future. What would that future look like if she said yes? What would she lose if she said no? The weight of the decision was suffocating, and yet it was also liberating. But Tasha knew that once she walked into Michael Ashford's office tomorrow, nothing would ever be the same. The life she had built, the struggles, the small victories, those would fade into the background. She would either accept this new world or turn her back on it. But could she really walk away from the opportunity? Could she really say no to the chance to change everything? The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlight creeping through the blinds. Tasha sat up and was swinging her legs off the bed. She needed air. She needed space to think. Quietly, she pulled on her shoes and grabbed her jacket, leaving the apartment with soft footsteps. The streets were empty, save for a few stragglers, still out late, caught in the same limbo she was. The cool night air wrapped around her like a welcome embrace. She breathed in deeply, the smell of wet pavement and the faint trace of coffee lingering in the air. The city had always felt alive to her, bustling, noisy, chaotic, but it also felt like home. She could get lost in these streets and no one would ever know. But today felt different. There was a sense of finality in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. As she walked down the sidewalk, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a message from her brother, Jason. "Sis, don't forget, tomorrow's your big day. Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you, love you." Tasha smiled softly, her heart warming. Jason always knew just what to say. He had been her rock, her reminder that even when everything seemed impossible, she wasn't alone. But this was different. She had never faced anything like this before. She stood on the corner of the block, staring up at the sky, trying to calm the storm brewing in her chest. The lights of the city flickered like distant stars, reminding her of the dreams she'd kept hidden for so long. But she had always imagined a different life for herself, one where she wasn't just scraping by, one where she didn't have to worry about the next bill or the next shift at the diner. But she never thought it would come like this, so suddenly, so overwhelmingly. A horn blared in the distance, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced around, realizing she had wandered to the edge of the city, near the old part of town where the buildings were worn and the streets were quieter. Up, she turned back toward the diner, her feet guiding her on their own. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement as she walked. The thought of seeing Michael again, of hearing his offer again, made her stomach twist. What did he really want from her? Was it about power? Was it about controlling her? Or did he really see something in her that no one else had? The closer she got to the diner, the heavier the weight on her shoulders became. Yet she didn't belong in this world of wealth and influence. She had never been a part of it. But what if she could be? What if, for once, she could escape the grind and make a real difference in her life? The door of the diner creaked open as she stepped inside, the familiar smell of grease and coffee welcoming her back like an old friend. The sound of the register ringing and the clatter of dishes filled the air, grounding her in the reality she knew all too well. And Tasha made her way to the counter, the place where she spent hours each day, serving customers and pretending like everything was fine. The old booth by the window was empty, just as she expected. But as she slipped behind the counter, something caught her eye. The business card. It was still there, tucked away in her apron pocket, like a reminder of everything she had yet to decide. She pulled it out, running her fingers over the smooth surface. Michael Ashford. Yet the name felt heavy in her hand, as if it had the power to change everything. Tasha took a deep breath and tucked the card back into her pocket. She wasn't ready to make a decision yet. She needed time. But time was running out. The hours passed in a blur. Tasha moved through the motions, checking on the few remaining customers, refilling coffee cups, wiping down tables. Her mind was elsewhere, drifting between the life she had known and the possibility of something more. And as the final bell rang and the last customer left, Tasha was alone again. The diner was empty, the lights dimmed, and the weight of her choice settled in her chest. She wasn't sure what she would do, but she knew she couldn't stay in this in-between place for long. Tomorrow would come, whether she was ready or not. Tomorrow, she would face Michael Ashford, and whatever decision she made, there would be no turning back. For a long moment, Tasha stood in the quiet of the diner, while her hands resting on the counter. The door to the back office creaked open, and Frank, the diner manager, appeared, a tired look on his face. "You good?" he asked, his voice gruff but familiar. Tasha nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just thinking about tomorrow." He gave her a knowing look, then shrugged. "Whatever happens, you'll make it work. You always do." She smiled again, more genuinely this time. "Thanks, Frank." As she walked out of the diner, the city lights greeted her once again. But tomorrow, she would meet Michael Ashford. Tomorrow, her life would change. And for the first time in a long time, Tasha felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be the chance she had been waiting for her whole life. The cool night air wrapped around her like a blanket, pushing her thoughts forward, toward the promise of something different. She stepped into the night, her footsteps echoing against the sidewalk as the city hummed around her. The sound of distant cars, or the faint laughter from a bar down the street. It all felt so far away now. Her mind was spinning, caught in the whirlwind of the choices before her. She had always believed that hard work would eventually pay off, that if you just kept pushing, kept grinding, The universe would reward you. But now, in the silence of the night, she wondered if there was more to life than just survival. Could there really be something else for her? Something that didn't come with struggle? Tasha stopped for a moment at the corner of the block, looking out over the street. The world was alive, full of possibilities, but also full of traps. She had seen it all before. The promises that weren't kept. The people who offered help only to pull away when it was time to deliver. She wasn't naive. She couldn't afford to be. But still, Michael's words lingered in her mind, warm like a promise. You deserve more than to just survive. You deserve to thrive. She exhaled sharply, while trying to release the tension building inside her. Maybe she didn't need to hold on to everything that was familiar. Maybe this was her chance to let go, to trust that the world wouldn't crush her the way it had before. But what if it did? The thought made her stomach turn. She had seen enough people fall from grace, seen how fast the world could turn on you when you least expected it. She had learned the hard way that the higher you climbed, the harder you fell. And yet, there was a part of her that wondered, what if Michael was different? What if, for once, there was someone who truly wanted to help? The decision wasn't as easy as it seemed. She had always worked for everything she had, even when it meant sacrificing her own happiness for her family. Her mother's health, her brother's future, her own dreams. She had put them all on the back burner for so long. But the life Michael was offering her, it wasn't just a life of luxury, but it was a chance to change everything, to have the freedom she had never dared to imagine. Tasha shook her head, trying to clear the thoughts that swirled in her mind. She needed to focus, needed to remember what had gotten her this far. She couldn't let herself get swept up in the idea of something better. She had worked too hard, fought too long, to let a dream pull her off course now. But as she walked back toward her apartment, her steps slow and heavy, and a part of her couldn't help but wonder if maybe it was time to let go of the weight she had carried for so long. The next morning, Tasha woke early, the sun just beginning to peek through the blinds of her bedroom. She had barely slept, tossing and turning all night, her mind caught between two worlds. The world of her own making, the world she had fought so hard to create, and the world that Michael was offering her, a world of possibilities and unknowns. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling her from her thoughts. She reached over and picked it up, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the text from her brother, Jason. "Sis, I know things are tough, but you've got this. Whatever happens today, I'm proud of you. Love you." Tasha smiled, the weight in her chest lifting slightly. Jason had always been her rock, the one who believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. He didn't know what she was about to face, didn't understand the magnitude of the decision she was about to make. But somehow, his words still gave her the strength to keep going. After a few moments, she set the phone down and got out of bed. The familiar routine of her morning, making coffee, checking on Maya, getting ready for the day, felt strangely comforting. It was as if she was trying to hold on to the pieces of her old life, even as she stood on the edge of something new. She made her way to the bus stop, her thoughts racing. The city was alive, buzzing with energy, but it felt like everything was happening in slow motion. She had never been one to make big decisions easily, and this felt like the biggest one of her life. She couldn't shake the feeling that, somehow, the future was already set in motion. When she arrived at Michael's building, her nerves were on edge, but she pushed them down, walking into the sleek lobby with as much confidence as she could muster. The security guard gave her a polite nod, when she stepped into the elevator. The ride up felt like an eternity, the quiet hum of the elevator amplifying the thoughts running through her head. As the doors opened, she stepped out into a world of glass and steel, a world that felt as if it had been designed to remind her how small she was. Michael's office was on the top floor, and as she walked down the hall, her heels clicking on the polished floors, she tried to keep her focus. But when she reached his door, something inside her froze. She took a deep breath, then knocked, her heart pounding in her chest. "Come in," Michael's voice called from inside. Tasha opened the door slowly, stepping into the room where everything felt so out of place. The space was modern and immaculate, the view of the city stretching out before her. Michael stood by the window, looking out at the skyline, but he turned when he heard her enter, his gaze sharp, as though he had been waiting for her all along. "Oh, good to see you again, Tasha," he said, his tone smooth, almost too polished. Tasha forced a smile, her throat tight. "Thanks for meeting me." Michael gestured toward the seat across from him. "Of course. I'm glad you came." As Tasha sat down, she could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her. This was it, the moment where everything could change. Michael didn't waste any time. "I know you've been thinking about my offer," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Well, and I know it's a big decision, but I want you to understand that this isn't just about money. This is about changing your life, your future. You've worked hard for what you have, but what if you could have more? More freedom, more security, more opportunity?" Tasha swallowed, her heart racing. "And what do you want from me?" Michael leaned forward, his voice steady but persuasive. "I want you to join me, to be part of something bigger than yourself. Together, we can change the game. And I need someone who has the integrity to make the right choices, even when the world is telling them to do otherwise." Tasha took a deep breath, her mind racing. This was it, the moment she would make her decision. Her entire life had led to this point. But was she ready to step into the unknown? Was she ready to trust Michael Ashford? She glanced down at the papers on the desk in front of him. The stacks of paperwork, the contracts, the deals, it all felt like too much. She didn't belong here. Oh, but then again, hadn't she always felt out of place, no matter how hard she worked? She looked back up at Michael, his eyes intense, waiting for her response. And for the first time, Tasha realized that her life had never truly been her own. It had always been about surviving, about getting by, but now she had a choice. She could choose to keep fighting, to keep struggling, or she could take the leap. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "I'm in." Michael's smile widened, and as if he had been expecting this all along. "Welcome aboard," he said, his voice low, full of promise. "You won't regret this." Tasha nodded, but deep down she wasn't sure. She had just made a decision that would change everything, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next. The weight of her words hung in the air, as if they had solidified into something tangible. Michael's smile widened, and he immediately stood, extending his hand across the desk to her. It was a firm, confident gesture, one that spoke volumes of the world he inhabited, a world of power, promises, and expectations. Tasha hesitated for just a moment before shaking his hand. The coolness of his touch sent a shiver down her spine, and for a brief second, she felt the enormity of what she had just agreed to. "Welcome aboard, Tasha," Michael said, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "I've been waiting for someone like you. I knew you had it in you." The words were meant to be encouraging, but Tasha felt a strange disconnect. His praise felt too easy, too predictable. She had always been the type to earn her recognition, to prove herself through her hard work and actions. But here, in this room, surrounded by glass walls and the hum of air conditioning, it felt like everything had been predetermined, like the game had already been set in motion long before she had even stepped foot into this building. She forced a smile, nodding as she stood up from the chair. "I appreciate the opportunity, Michael," she said, her voice steady but distant. I'll do my best." Michael seemed pleased with her response, his eyes never leaving hers as he reached for a stack of papers on the desk. "I know you will," he replied, his voice full of certainty. "We'll start with the basics today. Contracts, schedules, a quick tour of the building, get you settled in." Tasha followed him as he led her out of the office, her mind swirling. She had just crossed a line, and now she was stepping into a world she had never imagined for herself. The glossy hallways, the sterile elegance of the building, the sense of purpose in Michael's every move, it was all so foreign to her. Yet, there was an undeniable pull, a part of her that wondered what it would be like to belong here, to live in a world where money and influence were the currency of success. As they walked down the hall, Michael gave her a quick overview of the company, its history, and the people she would be working with. His words flowed easily, but Tasha barely registered them. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the diner, to the simple life she had left behind, to the customers who came in for their coffee. The same faces, the same routines. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had been just another waitress, serving food and cleaning tables. Now she was about to step into something much bigger, something much more complicated. They reached a sleek elevator, and Michael pressed the button for the top floor. The ride was silent, the soft hum of the elevator the only sound between them. Tasha couldn't help but notice how different she felt standing there, in this polished box compared to the cramped spaces of the diner or her small apartment. It was as if she was being transported to another world, one where the rules were different, where people didn't struggle the way she had. The elevator doors opened, and revealing a vast office space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an unobstructed view of the city. Tasha stood still for a moment, taking in the sight. It was breathtaking. The skyline stretched out before her, a labyrinth of buildings that seemed to go on forever. The city felt alive, pulsating with energy and ambition. Michael led her through the space, introducing her to various members of his team, sleek, well-dressed professionals who greeted her with polite smiles, as their eyes scanning her with subtle curiosity. She could feel the weight of their gaze, the quiet assessment that always came with being new, with not yet fitting in. But she didn't let it show. She smiled, nodded, and moved forward, trying to keep her nerves in check. At the end of the hallway, Michael stopped in front of a door with his name on it. "This is where the magic happens," he said, opening the door and stepping inside. The office was everything she had expected: modern, minimalist, and immaculate. A large desk sat against one wall, a few chairs arranged neatly in front of it. The walls were lined with shelves full of books, framed awards, and photographs of Michael with influential people from all over the world. It was clear that this was a man who had achieved everything he set out to do, and more. Tasha felt a twinge of unease as she stepped inside, the enormity of it all pressing down on her. The space was so cold, so calculated, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong here, that she was just another pawn in a game she didn't understand. Michael motioned for her to sit across from him. "Let's go over the details," he said, his tone businesslike now. "You'll start as my executive assistant, but I have bigger plans for you down the line. You've got the skills, Tasha, the drive. I'm confident you'll rise quickly." Tasha sat down, her hands resting on her lap, and her fingers nervously tapping against her thigh. The pressure was mounting. She had said yes, but she didn't feel ready. She wasn't sure if she would ever be ready. The world she had stepped into felt like a freight train, rushing forward without regard for what stood in its path. Michael continued talking, outlining the expectations, the schedules, the meetings she would be attending. His words blurred together in her mind. She nodded, pretending to listen, but all she could think about was what this meant for her, for her family, for her future. As the hours passed, Tasha found herself growing more and more distant, her thoughts drifting back to the small, familiar world she had left behind. She missed the simplicity of it, the quiet moments with Maya, the way things had been, before everything had changed. Eventually, Michael stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "I'll have someone show you to your desk," he said with a smile. "Oh, get comfortable. You'll be working with me closely from now on." Tasha forced a smile, standing up and shaking his hand once again. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice tight. As she walked out of the office, her heart heavy with uncertainty, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to lose herself. The weight of the decision she had made settled in her chest, and for the first time since accepting Michael's offer, she wondered if she had made the right choice. Was she truly ready for this life? Was she ready to leave behind everything she had ever known in exchange for the unknown? The elevator ride down was just as silent as before. Tasha's mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and fear. She had taken the first step. There was no turning back now, but the question lingered in her mind. Was she still the same person who had made that choice? Or had she already become someone else? When the elevator doors opened, Tasha stepped out into the lobby, the weight of the decision pressing on her shoulders. The future was waiting for her. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure if she was ready to meet it. The lobby was a blur of modern decor and polished floors. The golden light of the chandeliers reflected off the walls, making everything gleam with perfection. She walked through it all, her heels clicking softly against the smooth stone, her hands still trembling slightly. There were people coming and going, businessmen and women in suits, but none of them paid her any mind. They didn't look at her the way Michael had. They didn't see her at all. Tasha stepped out into the busy city street. The sounds of the city washing over her, car horns, chatter, the hum of a world moving at full speed. The weight of her decision felt heavy, like the air was thicker now, pressing in on her. She had left behind the diner, the safety of a life that, while exhausting, had always been familiar. She didn't know what she was walking into now. She didn't know what she had become. The sun was starting to dip low in the sky, the orange light casting long shadows across the pavement. She was tired, but there was a strange energy in her chest. The kind of energy that came from making a choice that felt bigger than anything she had ever faced. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting a message from her brother, or maybe a reminder from work. But instead, it was an unknown number. With a sigh, she answered, still unsure of what to expect. "Hello? Tasha? This is Daniel from Ashford Enterprises. Michael asked me to set up a meeting for you tomorrow to go over your contract details and get you started with the team. We'll need you to be here at 9 a.m. sharp." Her heart skipped a beat. The reality of it all was sinking in now. This wasn't just some meeting. This was the start of something bigger, something that would change her life in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Okay," she said, trying to steady her voice. "I'll be there." "Great," Daniel replied, his voice all business. "We'll be expecting you." The call ended, and Tasha stood there for a moment, letting the city bustle around her, almost as if she were an observer in her own life. The weight of the decision she had made had settled in like an anchor, and now she had to face the consequences. She walked home slowly, and her footsteps purposeful, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't help but wonder if she had made the right choice, if this was really her path. The apartment door creaked when she opened it, and Maya's voice immediately filled the space. "Mommy, you're home!" Tasha smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing for a moment as she saw her daughter rush toward her. "Hey, baby girl," Tasha said, kneeling down to hug her. "How was school?" Maya chattered on about her day, and her excitement filling the room as she handed Tasha her favorite drawing. It was of a house with a big garden, flowers everywhere, and a smiling sun in the sky. Tasha held it up, her heart swelling with pride. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. You're such a great artist." "Is that the house we're going to live in one day?" Maya asked, her voice filled with innocent hope. Tasha felt a lump form in her throat. She couldn't help but think of the life she had been living, barely scraping by, as always one step away from losing it all. But now, with Michael's offer, things could be different. She could give Maya the life she deserved. But was it worth it? She tucked the drawing into her bag, pressing a kiss to Maya's forehead. "We're going to have the best life, I promise. Whatever happens, we'll make it work." Maya grinned, oblivious to the weight Tasha was carrying. "I know, Mommy. You always make everything better." Tasha swallowed the knot in her throat. "Oh, I'll do my best," she whispered, though a part of her wasn't sure what that would look like anymore. The next morning came far too quickly. Tasha barely slept, her thoughts racing the entire night. The promise of something better hung in the air like an unanswered question. At 8:30 a.m., she stood in front of the building again, staring up at the sleek skyscraper with its glass windows reflecting the clear sky. Well, the city felt different this time, less like home and more like a place she didn't yet belong. As she walked through the doors and into the lobby, she could feel the eyes on her. The polished floors, the spotless walls, it was all too much. She tried to steady herself, reminding herself that she had made the right choice. This was her chance. A chance to give Maya a better life. A chance to step out of the shadows and into something real. Daniel was waiting for her in the lobby, and holding a clipboard and looking every bit the professional. "Tasha, good to see you. Ready to get started?" She nodded, swallowing her nerves. "Yeah, I'm ready." The elevator ride up was just as tense as the one before, but this time, it wasn't the unknown that made her feel uneasy. It was the weight of the decision she had made. She wasn't just going to work for Michael Ashford. She was stepping into his world. The doors opened, and she followed Daniel down the hall to a large conference room where several people were already seated. They looked up as she entered, some offering polite smiles, others just nodding in acknowledgement. Tasha took her seat, the reality of the moment sinking in. She had made it this far, and now it was time to see if she could keep up. "All right." Michael's voice broke through her thoughts as he stepped into the room, taking a seat at the head of the table. Let's get down to business." Tasha took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edge of the table as she prepared to face whatever came next. This was her moment. The life she had dreamed of was within reach, and all she had to do was take that final step. But deep down, a small part of her wondered, was this the right path? Or was it too late to turn back? Tasha sat at the long conference table, surrounded by faces she didn't recognize. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, thus adding to the sterile atmosphere of the room. Michael was at the head of the table, leaning back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. His presence filled the room, and even though he wasn't speaking, Tasha could feel his attention on her. She shifted in her seat, trying to push aside the nerves that had settled deep in her chest. This was the moment she would prove to herself that she could succeed in this world, the moment that could change everything. But she had to get through this meeting first. Michael spoke first, breaking the silence with a smooth, practiced tone. "We're here today because I believe in you, Tasha. You've got the drive, the heart. I want you to be part of something bigger than yourself." Tasha nodded, though part of her still felt like an outsider. She had heard these kinds of speeches before, heard promises of success and power, but they always felt distant, like something that only happened to other people. But Michael's words felt different, sincere even. The question was, could she trust him? Could she trust herself to step into this new world without losing what made her, well, her? She looked around the table, noticing the others listening intently. A few nodded along, and some of them scribbled notes in front of them. One man, who seemed to be in his mid-40s, kept glancing at her, his expression unreadable. Tasha's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly looked down at her hands, focusing on the way her fingers rested on the edge of the table. "Let's start with the basics," Michael continued, his voice pulling Tasha's attention back to him. "Tasha, I want you to get comfortable with this new role. It'll take some time to adjust, but once you're up to speed, I'll need you by my side. The work we do here, it's important. It's impactful, and I know you're the right person to make it happen." Tasha swallowed hard, trying to process his words. He made it sound so easy, when like all she had to do was show up, work hard, and everything would fall into place, but nothing had ever come that easy for her. "Are you ready for this, Tasha?" Michael's question snapped her back to the present, and she looked up to find him staring at her with that same intensity he always had. Tasha felt a shiver run down her spine. She wasn't sure. The weight of the decision was starting to feel heavier than she expected. She had stepped into this world, but now that she was here, she wasn't sure she belonged. "Yes," she said, the word escaping her lips before she could stop it. She didn't want to seem unsure. Not now. She had come this far, and she couldn't back down now. Michael smiled, his expression softening for the first time. "Good. Because the real work starts now." He motioned to the others, who had been waiting patiently. "Let's talk about the details," Michael said, his voice now brisk and businesslike. "We have some strategic meetings coming up, and I'll need you to attend and represent our interests. You'll start by reviewing some of the materials here, and then we'll move forward with the negotiations." Tasha nodded, her mind racing. She had no idea what kind of negotiations Michael was talking about, but she had learned long ago that sometimes you had to fake it till you made it. As the meeting continued, Tasha listened carefully, trying to absorb everything. Michael's team discussed financial reports, upcoming projects, and various deals. The words blurred together, but she focused on the tone of the conversation, on how each person spoke with confidence, as though they had been in this world all their lives. She felt a pang of insecurity. She had never been part of something this big, this corporate. She had always worked in service, always been on the receiving end of these kinds of decisions. But here she was, sitting at the table, a part of it all. The question was, how long would it take before she truly belonged? When the meeting ended, Michael stood and gestured for her to follow him. "Come on, let me show you your office," he said with a smile, as if he had just given her the keys to a new kingdom. Tasha followed him down the hall, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. They passed other employees, some nodding politely, others too busy to notice her presence. She couldn't help but feel like an imposter, walking through this pristine space in her modest clothes as if she didn't belong here at all. Michael led her to a small office, tucked away in a corner of the building. It was a stark contrast to the grand offices she had passed. The walls were lined with simple shelves, and a single desk sat in the middle of the room, cluttered with papers and files. "This will be yours for now," Michael said, his voice laced with a touch of humor. "I know it's not much, but it's a start." Tasha couldn't help but smile, though it was a little strained. "It's perfect," she said, taking in the space. The simplicity of it was almost a relief. There was no pressure to impress here, no expectations of grandeur. It was just her. Michael left her to settle in, promising to check in later. Tasha stood in the middle of the room for a moment, her fingers grazing the edge of the desk. The silence was overwhelming, and for the first time since walking into this building, she felt like she could breathe. But as she looked around the room, the reality of what she had just agreed to set in. She had made a choice, but that choice was only the beginning. What had she gotten herself into? As the hours passed and the office began to empty, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something much bigger than herself. She wasn't sure if she was ready for it. She wasn't sure if she ever would be, but she had made the choice. And now, she had to live with it. When the office finally emptied and the building grew quiet, Tasha stood by the window, looking out over the city. The skyline stretched out before her, a vast sea of lights and possibility. She didn't know where this path would lead. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she was on the edge of something that could change everything. Tomorrow would come, and whatever happened next, Tasha was no longer just a waitress in a diner. And she was someone who had a chance to make her dreams a reality. The only question left was, what was she willing to sacrifice to get there? As the last rays of daylight faded, Tasha took a deep breath, bracing herself for whatever would come next. The morning arrived with a steady, quiet rhythm, the sunlight creeping through the cracks in the blinds, casting soft patterns across the room. Tasha woke earlier than usual, her mind already racing with the events of the day ahead, and she had barely slept the night before, her thoughts spiraling with questions, doubts, and the weight of the decision she had made. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Maya, who was still curled up beneath the blankets, her tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful slumber. Tasha stood there for a moment, watching her daughter's innocent face, her heart full of love and longing. Maya had no idea what was at stake today. To her, everything was simple, everything was possible. But for Tasha, today was the beginning of something unknown, something that could change everything for both of them. The choice she had made the day before felt like a door opening into a world she didn't yet understand. She couldn't back out now. She had already crossed the line. She showered quickly, letting the hot water run over her tired muscles. The steam filled the small bathroom, clouding the mirror. But Tasha didn't mind. She didn't need to see her reflection right now. Oh, she just needed to breathe. As she dressed, her phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. She picked it up and saw a message from Michael's assistant, Daniel. Just a reminder, your meeting with Mr. Ashford is at 9 a.m. Please arrive 15 minutes early to complete some paperwork. Tasha swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the phone. It felt like the whole world was about to change with a single step. She had to make sure she was ready. She had to make sure she was the person Michael thought she could be. The minutes slipped by too quickly. Before she knew it, she was standing in front of her apartment door, ready to leave for the meeting. She paused for a moment, looking back at Maya, who had just stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Mommy?" Maya mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "Hey, baby," Tasha said, forcing a smile. She walked over and kissed her daughter's forehead, her heart tightening. "I'll be back soon. You be good for Grandma, okay?" Maya nodded sleepily, and Tasha stepped out of the apartment, locking the door behind her. The air was crisp as she made her way down the street. The city had already come to life around her, cars honking, people hurrying to work, the usual buzz of urban activity. But for Tasha, it felt like she was moving in slow motion. Her mind was a blur of thoughts, about Michael, about the job, about what this all meant for her future. She had made the decision, but now she was unsure of what it would really mean. She arrived at Ashford Enterprises just before 9 a.m., her nerves gnawing at her with each step. The building towered above her, its glass facade reflecting the morning sky. She stood outside for a moment, taking in the sight of it, feeling both small and strangely empowered at the same time. The security guard at the front desk let her through without hesitation, and soon she was standing in the lobby once again. The polished floors, the sleek, modern furniture. It was all so polished, so professional. It felt like a world that belonged to someone else, a world she had never imagined for herself. Daniel was waiting for her, his clipboard in hand. "Right on time," he said with a nod. "Mr. Ashford is expecting you." He led her through the same sleek hallways she had walked the day before, and once again, she felt out of place. They reached the conference room, where Michael was already waiting, sitting behind a large wooden table, as looking calm and composed. "Tasha, come in," Michael said, standing up and offering his hand. "It's good to see you again." Tasha smiled politely, shaking his hand. "Thank you for having me." He motioned for her to take a seat, and she did, sitting across from him at the large table. Michael's assistant placed a stack of papers in front of her, along with a pen. "Before we dive into the details," Michael said, his voice smooth, "I want to make sure we're on the same page. I know this is a big decision for you, and I respect that. But I also want to make sure you understand what you're stepping into." Tasha nodded, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the papers. "I understand," she said, though her mind was still racing. "This isn't just a job," Michael continued. "This is a partnership, a chance for you to grow within the company, to have a say in how things are run. We're building something big here, something that can change the landscape of this industry, and I believe you can play a key role in that." Tasha felt a flicker of something, maybe excitement, maybe fear. She couldn't tell. She had always been so focused on surviving, on getting by. She had never thought about building something, about shaping the future. Michael leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked onto hers. "I know it's a lot to take in, but I've watched you, Tasha. I've seen how you work, how you handle yourself under pressure. You've got the kind of character I need on my team. This is your chance to not just work for a living, but to live for something more." Tasha's pulse quickened. She had heard words like this before, people promising more, offering a way out. But something about Michael's presence, his conviction, made her want to believe him. "I want you to sign these contracts," Michael said, pushing the papers toward her. "Once you do, we'll get started right away. Well, the team is already waiting for you." Tasha glanced down at the papers. The terms were straightforward, nothing too complicated, at least at first glance. But the weight of what she was about to do settled heavily on her shoulders. This wasn't just a job. This was a chance to change everything. She picked up the pen, her hand shaking slightly, and signed her name at the bottom of the first page. As she finished, Michael smiled, leaning back in his chair. "I'm glad to have you on board, Tasha." For the first time since walking into the building, Tasha felt a flicker of hope. She had taken the first step, and now she was committed. But as she left the conference room, the door closing softly behind her, a part of her couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. What do you think of Tasha's big decision? Was it the right choice for her, or is she walking into something bigger than she can handle? And drop a comment below with your thoughts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next in her journey. Your thoughts matter, and we want to hear from you.